We've been focusing so much on Russia, Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza in the news lately. It's easy to forget there are also other countries experiencing their share of problems. For instance, the nations of Sudan and South Sudan continue to endure unrest with their ongoing war and famine, and millions of people there face starvation and poor health. So, who steps up to help? Well, to discuss this more, I'm bringing in Elaine Bombay, who joins us from Brantford, Ontario. She is the executive director of Cal Bombay Ministries and Gardens of Hope charity. Elaine, great to have you with us today. Welcome to Bridge City News.
It's great to be with you.
Okay, so maybe talk a little bit more about what's happening in Sudan. How bad is the situation there?
Well, the country of the Republic of Sudan has been in conflict for about 15 months. About 10 million people have been displaced from their homes. They're facing massive famine, and there doesn't appear to be an end in sight. And then South Sudan, which became a different country back in 2011, it went through a civil war just 2 years after independence. And parts of that country are stable, parts of it are not stable. So that really depends on where you are, but they have about 4 million people displaced. So the whole region is very volatile. Things can happen at a moment's notice. And then, of course, the economic and the food insecurity and the potential for violence against individuals is huge.
Wow, that is huge. Now, is there much help coming in from nations around the world, or is this an area sort of forgotten by most countries?
I would say for the most part, it's been forgotten. There are obviously some corners of the world that are very concerned about it. But where we work with, which is with primarily South Sudanese refugees, the UNHCR, which is the UN's refugee agency, is severely underfunded for all of the crises around the world. And for our particular situation, they have only gotten about a third of the funding they need for this year. So that has obvious impacts into the kinds of programs that they're able to offer the refugees.
Okay, and then with so many refugees fleeing to Uganda rather, what happens to them? Does the government and the United Nations provide places for them to live, or do they receive adequate food and other necessities, or is this in short supply?
I mean, let me just say that I think the Ugandan government does an amazing job with their refugee response. They welcome anybody who needs a place. They provide about 30 by 30-meter plot of land that's been donated by the local communities. They are given a tarpaulin and some wood so that they can start building a home. And they're given blankets and cooking pots. It's not a lot, but it will get people started. But it is in short supply again because of that underfunding. They don't get a lot of food. In fact, the refugees are getting 3 kilos of food a month. And just to show you what that looks like, this is what 3 kilos looks like. If you go to the grocery store, that would be 2 bags of beans and a bag of cornmeal for a month. It's not enough food.
And that's for a family
That's per individual.
per individual. So if you have a family of five, would you get five of those?
Yeah. But if somebody in your family is employed, then nobody in your family gets food.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's terrible. Gosh, these people are just going through so much. So, maybe Elaine, tell us about your ministry, Gardens of Hope, and when did your father, Cal Bombay, get this started, and how does it help refugees? What's the connection there with these refugees?
He started Cal Bombay Ministries 20 years ago when what was then Sudan was drawing to the end of its civil war. And the refugees were starting to come back into the country. And he wanted to grow food so that those refugees would have something to eat and create an economy that they could, immediately take part in. Then when the next civil war started in 2013, and the people that we were working with started to go into Uganda. So by 2017, the area that we worked in, which is called Kajukeji, was pretty well emptied out of people. They were all refugees now in Uganda. And it wasn't safe for us to stay in South Sudan anymore. So we thought, well, what do we do now? At that time, we also had another project in the capital city of Uganda called Kampala, where we were doing gardens. And we realized that God had already prepared us for this crisis by showing us how to do these gardens. We had a team there that was willing to take on more work and start doing the same training in the refugee settlement because the refugees don't have a lot of land. They can't grow the fields that they're used to. And it is a different mindset, but we are able to show them that you can grow a lot of food in a very, very small space.
Wow, that's beautiful. You've helped a lot of people. How many so far would you say?
In the refugee settlement, we have helped 32,550 families since 2017.
Wow. Now, how can people here in Canada help you reach more people?
The way that we help the refugees is to provide them with a day of training in garden techniques, and then they go home with a garden kit. That kit includes a hoe, four kinds of vegetable seeds, some soap, a Bible, growing sacks, and then as many follow-up visits as they need. And so we ask people to donate $50 for each one of those gardens. And the more money that we're able to receive, that means the more families that we're able to help.
Yeah, of course. Now, you have an ongoing outreach in the needy areas of the city of Kampala, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's called the Urban Farming Project. So, can you share what's happening there?
We've been working there since 2013, doing the same garden project, but the people in the what we would call the slum areas, they get even less land. Some of them only have a couple square meters. But again, you can grow food even in a couple square meters. It's just a way of thinking about it differently. Rather than growing perhaps a traditional garden, you grow in a garden sack so that you're growing horizontally, not just vertically. So we've been able to assist about 4,000 families in those years. And we're seeing a lot of people go from not being able to eat every day to actually having small businesses where they're selling their excess food.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. I mean, that in itself is a success story, but can you share any other success stories from South Sudan or Uganda about people rising out of poverty?
But there's a young man that I heard about recently. His name is Musiga, and he was working in a hotel, not getting enough money to really look after his family. Often they would have to go without food. He came to our office, started training, and his garden was providing for his family. But he realized that if he quit his job and devoted all of his time to growing vegetables, that he would be able to make more money than he was when he was employed. So now he harvests twice a day, gets two wheelbarrows full of vegetables that he sells. He has a small internet-based business where people can order their vegetables. He plants gardens for other people if that's what they need. And he's doing really well. His family is thriving. His kids are all in school. And that to me is when we see success, that he's taken a tiny, really a tiny seed that we gave and created something for himself out of that.
Wow, I love how he's sort of, embarking on that e-commerce part of that
Yeah.
as well. That's really cool. Now, Elaine, your ministry not only wants to see physical needs taken care of, but also the emotional and the spiritual needs. So tell us how you're partnering with Good Friends Church.
Good Friends Church has been with us since the time that we were working in South Sudan. When obviously when the war happened, Pastor Duku Scopus replanted the church in the refugee settlement. And they are, you could call it the spiritual arm of Cal Bombay Ministries. We work with them to provide trauma healing, to equip pastors to have more skills themselves, because a lot of these pastors have never really been to theological school. They saw a need and they started pastoring. So we're partnering with organizations like Galcom International to provide audio Bibles for women and older people who can't read. We're looking at other organizations to come in and fill the gaps that we don't have, but also using Good Friends Church as a launching pad so that we can work with all of the churches to make sure that the pastors are equipped to minister to the people that they're dealing with. The settlement that we're working in is 137,000 people. That's 137,000 people who've gone through unspeakable trauma. And so we want to reach them with help. So it's not just ministering to their physical needs, but if there's ever going to be a successful nation of South Sudan, those people need to know healing and wholeness in their lives.
Yeah, well, just as you mentioned, I would imagine there are many psychological and emotional issues that refugees have to deal with because of the war and everything that they've been through. So, how are they coping with all of that?
A lot of them are not coping well. And the last rainy season, when the rations had been cut down to those 3 kilos, there was a lot of despair because during the dry season, you can't grow food. There's just simply no rain for about 5 months. And that leads obviously to a lot of negative emotional things like a lot of drug abuse and alcohol abuse, violence within the families increases, and suicides go up. So if we can help people with food, then they'll have enough food that they can put away some for the dry season, and then also help them to deal with those emotional issues. And they tell us that having the Bible makes a big difference because now they can sit and listen to God's word or read it for themselves and find comfort and hope. And that's why we call it Gardens of Hope, because gardens and hope need to go together.
Yeah, are you seeing huge changes among these refugees as they're getting these Bibles given to them and they're hearing this message?
The churches are growing, especially with the audio Bibles. Within the first week, I was hearing stories that people were starting to come to church because maybe the lady came and she just plays that Bible all day long. People come and sit down in the evenings, the neighbors will gather together and they're starting to study the Bible together and to talk about issues. The pastors will go and visit them and sit down and mentor those little groups. And so we are seeing people who are finding the help that they need. And we want to do more. So we will be bringing in more organized training, if you will, to help those pastors take that a step further.
Wow. Can you maybe explain to our viewers how simple it is to help change lives? What can we do, Elaine?
A garden is the most simple thing in the world. And yet it changes lives because it's not just giving them some vegetables. They can sell those vegetables and get fees for their school children to buy medicine, to buy the things that they need. So planting a garden really does change a life. And as I mentioned before, we equipped the people, we give them training, we give them the tools, and each of those gardens is $50, and it absolutely changes a life.
Isn't it amazing how it just all starts with the basics? Get them some food, and that might help depression, and it will definitely help flourish a family, and not just through nutrition, but also turning around and growing and selling. It's incredible what you're doing. Thanks so much for sharing this with us today, Elaine.
My pleasure.
Elaine Bombay is the executive director of Cal Bombay Ministries and Gardens of Hope charity.